As I make this video today, the S&P 500 is experiencing its worst drawdown since March of 2020. Panic is overtaking the markets as the VIX, a measure of volatility, jumps from 17 to 32. The great question on everyone's mind, is this the big one? Is this the financial meltdown Michael Burry has been warning us about since 2020? The everything bubble finally popping. In today's video, we step back and analyze the situation from a different angle and look into the possibilities that lie ahead. Some of these scenarios will absolutely shock you. We first begin with the why. A few weeks ago, on January 11th, Fed Reserve Chairman Jerome Powell announced that the U.S. economy is, quote, both healthy enough and in need of tighter monetary policy. He would go into further details throughout the meeting, but it was clear to everyone that the Feds were finally tapping out. The days of 0% interest and massive asset purchase programs would begin to end, and it was no surprise that the market almost immediately began to react to this news. The S&P jumped a small amount on January 12th before beginning its significant decline down. Since the announcement, the index is down 7% and it faces major headwinds up ahead. For anything to change and for stocks to bounce, the world needs to address three major problems plaguing the markets. One is very obvious. It's the biggest variable when it comes to market dynamics. Interest rates. Powell obviously needs to calm things down and change his aggressive hawkish tune. Now, clearly there is a major problem with this. We spoke about the double-edged sword on this channel before. Powell can choose to raise the rates, a decision we believe would crash the economy, or he can choose to ignore and print, which would inflate the dollar even further. According to economists like Peter Schiff, the Federal Reserve would rather inflate the dollar, and a decision like the one made on January 11th would be subject to some, quote, adjustments should a fire begin to burn everything down. Take a listen to him explain exactly what is about to happen.
Had the markets reacted negatively to the news that the Fed was going to start to taper, maybe Powell would have immediately backtracked and done some kind of damage control, either at the press conference that immediately follows the decision, or maybe tomorrow or the next day, to the extent that there is an adverse reaction. Because I think the Fed always takes the temperature of the markets to determine whether or not its policy decisions were correct. If the market goes down, then it's an indication that the policy was a mistake, because after all, the Fed is really gearing its policies to the markets, and it is completely beholden to what the financial markets do. And so it's not going to pursue any course of action that may be detrimental to the market. Of course, it also cares about the bubble economy and making sure that that doesn't deflate. But the more immediate litmus test is always the market, because you can have an immediate adverse reaction to a Fed policy decision. And if you go back and look at what the Fed typically does, if there is an adverse reaction, they quickly try to repair the damage by basically saying, oh, we didn't really mean what we said, or they try to clarify what they claim to have meant once they realize that the markets took it in a way that they didn't anticipate.
So there you have Peter essentially stating that given the current environment, it's very likely that Jerome Powell comes out and backtracks many of the things he said on January 11th. Sure, inflation may be at 7%, but keeping the stock market bubble going is sadly a priority for many elites who have significant influence over Fed actions. It will come as no surprise that we see the return of policies similar to those we saw in March of 2020 if indeed the markets take a turn for the worst. Besides these monetary changes, we're also seeing terrible economic data that seems to suggest a slowdown in demand. Citigroup's Economic Surprise Index has fallen back to negative territory once again. This infamous index simply measures the degree to which incoming economic data is either beating or missing forecasts, with a negative reading occurring when the recent reports have been missed in aggregate. This downturn is further evident with recent tech earnings. Take for an example Netflix, which reported on the 21st that it had weakening subscriber additions, an announcement that led to the stock falling over 25%, down about 50% from its peak. It's also a warning to other tech companies that any bit of bad news is likely to be punished severely, while any bit of good news will result in small, insignificant gains. Here is Peter further explaining this.
Well, after the market closed on Thursday, Netflix reported earnings, and though the earnings were better than expected, the subscriber growth was well below expectations, and that's all it took to cause the stock to immediately tank about 20% in after hours trading. It was down as much as maybe 25% on Friday. It closed slightly off the lows, down about 22% on the day. That brought the weekly decline to 24.4%. So far this year, Netflix is down 34%. The month of January isn't even over, and we're now down 43% from last year's high, solidly into bear market territory.
Then, on top of all this, we have significant geopolitical issues that could seriously impact the stock market. The biggest is the situation in Ukraine. Over the weekend, it was reported that President Biden was seriously considering sending troops to Eastern Europe and the Baltics. A Russian invasion is becoming a severe threat, with Putin amassing a large number of troops along the border, with the Ukrainians forming paramilitary forces prepping for a national resistance. Some even claim that the Russians are looking to take the Suwalki Gap, a move that would effectively combine the Russian enclave of Kaliningrad and the rest of Russia proper. With so much natural gas moving throughout this region and NATO interests surrounding the entire area, a Russian invasion would undoubtedly shake up the markets even further, especially for commodities like oil and gas. Take a listen to Helmina Croft, Global Head of Commodity Strategy at RBC Capital Markets, explain what would happen if Putin decided to take Kiev.
What happens if they do? If Vladimir Putin decides to go into Ukraine, by the way, he went in 2014. I was in Russia when he annexed part of Crimea. This would be much bigger than that. What happens if he does? What do we do? What happens to energy prices?
I mean, we've said we are not going to be sending troops to help Ukraine. It is not a NATO country. The question is, will we provide some other support to Ukrainian forces? But the expectation is Russia has overwhelming military power. If they want to take Kiev, it could be a horrible couple of weeks, but they could take Kiev. The question is, what type of economic price will they pay for it? Now, the Biden administration talks about crippling sanctions they will impose on Russia, very stringent financial sanctions. So look for Russia potentially being kicked out of the SWIFT payment system, targeting the ruble. But they have said also they're not going to sanction energy because they want to keep the flow of energy, particularly into Europe. But the question is, does Vladimir Putin respond precisely by hitting the West where it hurts, by cutting off the supplies of gas into Europe, by curtailing Russian oil exports, using its power in OPEC to try to get the producer group to withhold supply? So this is going to be a very big challenge to the Biden administration. They do not want $100 barrel oil, but a Russian invasion of Ukraine is clearly the path to $100 oil.
$100 oil. We saw last time what happens to an economy when oil prices hit $163 a barrel back in 2008. The entire worldwide economy slowed down, and a massive economic recession plagued nearly every country on Earth. An oil shock in 2022 would undoubtedly send the markets into a tailspin, and when you have Russia as the enemy, a significant influencer on OPEC members, and the third largest producer of petroleum, the consequences can be severe and heartfelt. Nobody can predict what will happen, but we are living through some interesting times, and the 2022 stock market will likely go down in history as we watch multiple stories unfold in the coming months. Thank you guys for watching. As always, please make sure you hit that like and subscribe button if you enjoyed it. And if you have a moment, please check out my other channel linked in the description below. And follow me on Twitter for more updates.